1871, East Texas, the Pine Belt south of the Sabine River. A man named Darnell Pruitt rode out of a supply post outside a settlement called Cutter's Ford with more iron on his body than most men see in a year. He'd been in the field 6 weeks already, and he was heading back out for another 4. Before he put his boot in the stirrup, he laid everything out on a fence rail and checked it the way a carpenter checks a toolbox before a long job. A Bowie-style belt knife, heavy enough to split kindling, rode on his left hip. A smaller patch knife, 3 inches of blade, rode in a pouch on his cartridge belt. A draw knife for working wood sat rolled in a piece of oiled canvas behind his cantle. A hatchet, handle wrapped in rawhide to keep it from slipping in wet weather, hung on the right side of his saddle. A fire kit in a tin, char cloth, flint, steel striker, and a twist of tow linen. A coil of waxed linen cord 40 feet, folded flat, a bone-handled awl, a sail needle, and a card of thread waxed so stiff it crackled. A spring lancet in a brass sleeve. A small folding farrier's knife. A flat file, double cut, 8 inches. 2 dozen pre-cut leather patches, each one round, each one the same size, folded between 2 pieces of birch bark and tied with a strip of sinew. Period supply house catalogs from the early 1870s priced a working kit like that between $35 and $50, depending on steel quality and handle material. Darnell Pruitt was a working ranger in eastern Texas, not a collector. Every piece on that fence rail had a job, and he knew exactly what it was. Today, most Americans couldn't name 6 of those pieces. They couldn't tell you what a spring lancet was for, or why the cord was waxed, or why those leather patches were all cut the same size before he left the post instead of cut in the field. That knowledge didn't vanish because it became useless. It vanished because somebody else started making the decisions. But here's the twist. Those pieces weren't primitive, neighbor. Every one of them was resolved. The draw knife was that shape because it had to take a spoke off a wheel hub in a tight space. The waxed linen cord was that weight because it had to hold a hobble in wet ground without stretching. The spring lancet was that size because a man had to use it one-handed in low light with mud on his fingers. Each form was the answer to a specific question. What replaced them wasn't better at the job. It was cheaper to ship. What Darnell Pruitt had on that fence rail belongs to a class with a name. Ranger Field Kit, working carry, the tools a man needed to keep himself, his horse, and his gear alive between settlements in terrain where the nearest blacksmith might be 40 miles behind him. Learning to name the class and read why each piece had exactly that shape is something no one can charge you for later. My name is Wade Tolliver, 58 years old. My family has been on Tolliver Gap on the Cumberland Plateau in eastern Kentucky since 1788. I have a book in front of me right now. Black cover, swollen corners, ink faded to brown and spots. It belonged to my grandfather, Emmett Tolliver. He carried it from 1931 to 1979. In the front, he kept accounts, what every tool cost and how long it lasted. In the margins and on the back pages, he wrote how you sharpen it, how you repair it, how you know a good one from a bad one the moment you pick it up. Emmett didn't invent any of this. In 1931, he started writing down what his own grandfather had taught him, and that man learned it in the 1850s. The book isn't the beginning of the chain. It's the last record of a chain that goes back a long way. Emmett made me promise it wouldn't die with him. I've still got 40 years of margins I haven't opened. Tonight I'm opening a few more. 2 pieces in this list I want you to hold in mind before we get there. Number 14 is the one most people step right past in a display case without stopping. Period catalogs put it at under $1 in most supply houses. Today, an authenticated working example in honest condition changes hands somewhere between $800 and $1,200, depending on maker marks and condition. I'll tell you how to tell the real ones from the copies. Number 3 is a piece that nearly every working ranger on horseback in the 1870s carried, and most people today would pick it up and not know which end to hold. We'll get there. 25. The waxed linen cord, pre-measured and folded flat, Standard carry length was between 30 and 50 feet. A ranger carried this because rope rots, leather stretches wet and shrinks dry, and waxed linen does neither. Period supply house catalogs priced it at a few cents per yard. Today, original coils recovered from period ranger equipment and documented by provenance have been seen trading between $150 and $300 among collectors of working frontier gear. To spot an old one, look at the weave under a glass. Pre-industrial waxed linen has an irregular ply, hand-spun, tighter on one side than the other. Machine-spun reproductions are perfectly even. The wax on an old coil has yellowed and gone slightly brittle at the folds. Fresh reproductions are still soft and clear. 24. The charcloth tin. A small hinged tin, usually repurposed from something else, punched with a single small hole in the lid. The charcloth inside was cotton or linen burned in a low oxygen fire until it turned black but didn't ash. When a spark from flint and steel landed on it, it held a coal long enough to transfer to tinder. This was standard issue fire starting before friction matches became reliable and cheap in the field. Period fire starting kits in working condition were a few cents at any supply post. Documented period examples with original contents in collector condition have been seen between $200 and $500. To recognize an original tin, the punch hole in the lid will show wear and discoloration from heat use on the inside edge. The cloth inside, if any remains, will be uniformly black and will crumble at the edges, not flex. Reproductions often have cloth that's too intact and a tin that's too bright. 23. The bone-handled awl. Straight spike, 3 to 4 inches of hardened iron or early steel, set into a turned bone or antler handle, sometimes with a brass ferrule to keep the handle from splitting under pressure. Used for punching holes in leather for repair, saddle stitching, saddlebag straps, boot soles, bridle cheeks, carried in a belt pouch, or rolled in a kit. Period. Supply house price was 10 to 20 cents. Authenticated working awls with original handles, documented period provenance, have changed hands between $80 and $250. To tell a good one, the ferrule should be press, fit, and show no gap. The spike should be round in cross-section at the tip and show a slight taper that was worked, not cast. Cast reproductions have a visible seam line running the length of the spike. 22. The flat file, double cut, 8 inches. This was the tool that kept every other tool working. Double cut means 2 sets of teeth cut across each other at an angle, which removes metal faster than a single cut file. Rangers used it to touch up a blade edge in the field, to clean a frog on a horse's hoof, to dress a bolt thread that had peened over. Without a file, every other cutting tool on the list eventually became useless. Period price was 15 to 30 cents at most hardware suppliers. Good working examples with clear-cut teeth and original handles in collector condition have been seen between $60 and $150. To identify an old American file, the teeth were cut by hand on a chisel-driven machine, so the spacing is slightly irregular under close inspection. Modern files have perfectly uniform tooth spacing. Also check the tang. Old files have a hand-forged taper to the tang. Cast reproductions are uniform from shoulder to tip. Here's your task this week, friend. Go find a file in your father's toolbox or your grandfather's barn. Turn it over and look at the teeth under a light. Irregular spacing, slightly varied depth that's hand-cut, perfectly uniform, mirror image, rows that's modern. One tells you something about where it came from. Write down what you find and put it in the comments. 21. The sail needle and waxed thread. The sail needle is a 3-sided needle, triangular in cross-section, designed to punch through heavy material without tearing it sideways. Rangers use it with heavy waxed linen thread to stitch leather tack, canvas bags, wool coats, and boot uppers in the field. Triangular cross-section cuts a hole slightly larger than the needle itself, which closes tighter around the thread once the wax sets. A round needle tears. A triangular needle cuts clean. Period price was negligible, a few cents for a paper of needles. Collector interest in documented period field sewing kits is modest but real, with complete kits seen between $50 and $150. To identify old sail needles, the triangular taper was hand-filed in the period and will show slight irregularity in the facets. Modern sail needles are machined and perfectly uniform. 20. The folding farrier's knife. A heavy-bladed folding knife with a curved spade-shaped tip designed for cleaning and trimming a horse's hoof. The curved tip let a man work around the frog, the soft tissue in the center of the hoof, without cutting into it. A ranger, who let a horse go lame 50 miles from the nearest post, had a long walk ahead of him. Period supply house catalogs priced these between 40 and 75 cents. Authenticated period farrier's knives in working condition, with clear maker's marks, have changed hands between $250 and $600 among working tool collectors. To spot an original, the blade pivot on period folders shows uneven wear on one side from habitual single-direction opening. The blade itself should show a slight hollow grind on the face from repeated sharpening, and the tip curve will be asymmetric from hoofwork use. Now, the first pattern break, friend. From number 19 down to 12, we leave the general field tools and move into the pieces that kept the horse alive and the ranger mobile. A man on foot in eastern Texas in 1871 was a man in trouble. 19. The spring lancet in a brass sleeve. A small spring-loaded blade and a hinged brass housing, roughly the size of a thumbnail when closed. Pressed against skin and triggered, it made a shallow, controlled cut. Rangers used it to bleed a swollen leg on a horse, to lance an infected saddle sore, or to treat their own minor infections before they turned serious. This is a medical tool, not a weapon. Period price was 50 to 75 cents at a druggist supply. Documented examples in good condition with original brass housings have been seen between $150 and $400. To identify originals, the brass housing on period pieces was cast and hand-fitted, so the two halves of the hinge will show a slight mismatch in the casting. The blade, when extended, should show a slightly uneven grind from period handwork. Modern reproductions have perfectly matched housings and machined blades. 18. The hoof pick, wrought iron, straight with a slight hook at the tip. Every working horseman in the period carried one because a stone lodged in the hoof frog lames a horse within miles. The hook was at angle because it had to get under a packed stone without digging into the soft tissue. Too shallow an angle and it skips off. Too steep and it cuts. That specific angle was worked out by a lot of sore horses. Period price was 5 to 15 cents. Documented period hoof picks. In working condition, change hands between $40 and $120. To identify old wrought iron examples, look for a slight fibrous grain on the surface, visible under rust or patina. Wrought iron has slag inclusions that run in lines with the working direction. Cast iron and mild steel reproductions are smooth and homogeneous in the grain. 17. The leather punch, rotary, a small rotating cylinder with 6 punching tubes of graduated sizes set in a handled frame. Rangers used it to add holes to belts, bridles, straps, and saddlebag closures as leather stretched or shrank with weather and work. A new hole in the right place kept a rig from failing. Period supply house price was 20 to 40 cents. Authenticated period rotary punches with clear maker stamps have been seen between $100 and $300 in collector condition. To spot an original, the rotating cylinder on period punches was press, fit, and will wobble very slightly in the frame after decades of use. Modern reproductions are machined to tighter tolerances and rotate with little play. Also check the punch tubes. Period tubes were hand-reamed and show slight ovality at the cutting edge. 16. The rawhide mallet, a cylinder of dried rawhide, shrunk onto a turned wooden core with a short, straight handle. Used to seat saddle rivets, set tent stakes, and drive pegs without ringing a bell of noise the way an iron hammer would. Rawhide absorbs impact and deadens sound. Rangers working in terrain where noise discipline mattered carried one over an iron head. Period price was 15 to 30 cents at a saddler's supply. Working examples in collector condition have been seen between $80 and $220. To identify period rawhide mallets, the rawhide cylinder will have shrinkage cracks running longitudinally on old examples, often with a slight brown discoloration from oil and use. The core will show through at the ends, where the hide pulled back. Reproductions made from modern, processed rawhide stay smooth and even at the surface. Here's your task this week, neighbor. If you have any leather straps in that inherited toolkit, look at the holes. Are there 2 or 3 extra holes punched after the original, all in a line? That's a working tool. Somebody lived in it. That detail alone tells you more about provenance than any paper. 15. The pre-cut leather patches, round, uniform size, 24 of them, folded between bark. This gets its own number because most people walk right past what it means. Pre-cutting them before leaving the post meant no measuring in the field, no knife work in bad light, no variation. Every patch fit the same job. The job was sealing a crack in a water bag, reinforcing a worn stirrup, leather, patching a boot upper before a blister formed. Uniformity was the point. Period cost was essentially nothing. Leather scraps from a saddler. Today, a documented set of pre-cut period leather trail patches inside original bark wrapping is a rare find, and such kits have been noted by institutions including the Smithsonian's Division of Working Material Culture as representative of period field discipline. Individual documented examples have been seen in the range of $150 to $400 among living history collectors. Not a second pattern break, neighbor. From number 14 down to 7, we are no longer talking about the tools every working man carried. We are talking about the pieces that separated a ranger who came back from one who didn't. These are the tools that solved the problems that couldn't wait. 14. The draw knife, short blade, 10 to 12 inches of cutting edge between 2 handles, set at right angles to the blade. Pulled toward the body across a piece of wood, it peels a controlled shaving, thin or thick depending on angle and pressure. Rangers used it to true a replacement spoke, to shape a replacement axle pin, to split kindling in wet weather when an axe would just drive the grain. The short blade mattered because you were working on horseback gear, not lumber. Period supply house price in early 1870s. Catalogs ran between 60 cents and $1.20. Authenticated short draw knives with original handles in working condition have been seen changing hands between $800 and $1,200. To identify period examples, the handles were most often turned ash or hickory and will show a slight asymmetric wear pattern on the underside from grip use. The blade bevel on period examples was hand ground on a water wheel and shows a slightly uneven hollow from shoulder to edge. Machine ground blades are geometrically consistent. 13. The folding camp scissors, heavy gauge iron or early steel with offset bows so the blades cleared a work surface. Rangers use these for cutting bandage cloth, trimming wick for lanterns, cutting sinew thread, and trimming the edge of a leather patch. They are not sewing scissors. The offset bows are the tell. They kept the knuckles off the work. Period price was 20 to 40 cents. Authenticated period camp scissors in good working condition have been seen between $120 and $350. To identify old iron scissors, look at the pivot rivet. Period scissors were hand riveted, and the rivet head will be slightly off center and show peening on both faces. Modern scissors have machine set rivets that are perfectly centered and uniform. 12. The combination tool, a small wrought iron piece, palm size, with a slotted driver on one end and a flat pry on the other, sometimes with a small punch pin on the side. This existed for working the screws and pins on a percussion-era firearms lockwork without damaging the wood stock. Rangers needed to be able to field strip and clear a fouled action in the field. Period supply house price was 20 to 50 cents. Authenticated period combination tools with clearmaker stamps have been seen between $200 and $500. To identify an original The slot driver will show asymmetric wear from habitual use on one specific screw size. The pry end will show corner rounding from use. Reproductions are uniformly unworn unless artificially distressed, and artificial distressing on a flat iron tool is almost always too even. 11. The canvas needle case, waxed, rolled. This is the container, not the needles. A ranger's needle case was a strip of heavy waxed canvas rolled tight and tied, with the needles slipped through the canvas weave-in rows by type and size. Unroll it, and you had a full repair kit laid out in order. Roll it back and it was 2 inches across and fit in a coat pocket. The canvas was waxed to keep moisture off the needles, because a rusted needle is a broken needle at the worst time. Period materials cost was negligible. Complete, documented period rolled needle cases with original contents have been seen between $100 and $250. To identify an old canvas roll, the wax on original period canvas has oxidized to a brown yellow and will flake slightly at creases. The stitching at the tie closure will be hand sewn with irregular spacing. 10. The fire piston. A closed cylinder of hardwood or antler fitted with a tight sealing plunger. A small piece of tinder, usually char cloth, was placed in a recess at the end of the plunger. When the plunger was rammed hard into the cylinder, the sudden compression of the air inside raised the temperature high enough to ignite the char cloth. Pulled out immediately, the coal could be blown into a fire. This is a physics tool that predates matches and works in wet conditions when flint and steel may fail. Period price for a well-made example was between 50 cents and $1.50 from a specialist maker. Authenticated period fire pistons in working condition with original plunger seals have been seen between $400 and $900 among fire-starting tool collectors. To identify originals, the cylinder interior will show a slight brown staining from tinder ash at the closed end. The plunger seal, if original, will be a leather disc and will be compressed and hardened. Reproduction seals are often rubber or soft leather and remain flexible. Not a conspiracy, neighbor. Just how markets work. When friction matches became cheap enough to sell by the box at every general store, nobody banned the fire piston. Nobody had to. Matches cost a penny. The skill to use a fire piston cost a winter's practice. The market made the choice for most people. Emmett wrote it down exactly that way. Tool went away when the cheaper thing arrived, not when the better thing did. 9. The farrier's buffer, a small-handled chisel with a slightly beveled face, used to trim the wall of a horse's hoof before fitting or checking a shoe. Not the same as a hoof knife or a hoof pick. The buffer removed horn material from the outer wall to level it for a shoe to seat flat. A ranger without a buffer and the knowledge to use it was dependent on finding a farrier at whatever post or settlement came next. That dependency could be days away. Period price was 25 to 50 cents. Authenticated period. To identify old examples, the face of the bevel will show a slight rocking wear from the angle at which it was driven. The handle socket will show case hardening patina different from the mild iron body. 8. The water purifying charcoal bag. A small cloth bag of activated charcoal carried to filter turbid water through before boiling. A ranger filling his canteen from a creek that had cattle upstream in it had a problem. Running it through the charcoal bag first didn't sterilize it, but it pulled out sediment, tannin, and some of the taste of rot, and then boiling did the rest. This combination of charcoal filtration and boiling was practical field water management long before anyone sold a commercial filter. Period cost was essentially nothing. Charcoal from the previous night's fire packed into a cloth bag. Documented period examples with original charcoal content are rare finds noted by living history collections. When they appear in documented estate sales, they have been seen between $80 and $200 as curiosities of working material culture. 7. The striker plate, wrought iron, palm size, with a serrated or file-cut striking face. This is distinct from a flint and steel kit's C-shaped striker. The striker plate was a flat piece worn on a belt or kept in a pouch, used to produce sparks from flint on a flat surface, rather than a curved one, which gave more control over where the spark landed. It was also used as an emergency rasp for the edge of a soft metal tool. Period price was 5 to 15 cents. Documented period striker plates with provenance from working tool collections have been seen between $60 and $180. To identify old wrought iron examples, the file cut face will show uneven wear across the teeth from use, heavier in the center where the flint contact was habitual. Reproductions often show uniform wear or no wear. Now the third pattern break, friend. From number 6 down to 1, these are the pieces this audience knows the names of but doesn't know how to read. The ones you've heard of. The reason they're in the bottom 6 is not because they were common, it's because they were the difference. Pay attention to how they were made, not just what they were called. 6. The Bowie-style belt knife, field grade, not the presentation piece under glass. The working version that a ranger carried in eastern Texas in 1871 was not the showpiece with a silver guard and a stag handle. It was a knife with a 6 to 9 inch blade, a false back edge that ran from the clip point back about a third of the blade length, a simple brass or iron guard, and a handle of bone, antler, or plain hardwood. The false back edge served two purposes. It reduced the thickness of the blade behind the tip for boring and prying, and it changed the way the blade came to point, allowing a more controlled entry into a cut. It was a utility knife that happened to be large. The distinction between the display Bowie and the working Bowie is the entire game for collectors. Period field-grade examples from documented makers in the Southwest have been recorded in Smithsonian working tool collections. Authenticated field-grade working examples in honest used condition have been seen between $600 and $2,000, varying widely by provenance and maker marks. To identify a genuine field piece, look for a simple pinned handle, not glued or bracketed. The guard should be hand-fit, with a slight gap on at least one side. The blade grind will be slightly uneven from repeated field sharpening. 5. The patch knife. The blade is 3 inches or less. It existed for one job, cutting the greased linen or leather patch to size at the muzzle of a rifle before seating a ball. You cut the patch flush with the muzzle face after the ball was seated on it, not before. That's why the blade was small and thin, too long and you couldn't work at the muzzle, too thick and you couldn't cut cleanly against the iron. Every dimension of a patch knife was determined by the muzzle and the patch and nothing else. Period price was 15 to 35 cents. Authenticated period patch knives in working condition, with documented provenance, have been seen between $250 and $750. To identify an original, the blade will be noticeably thin in cross-section, thinner than any modern utility blade of that length. The tip will be straight or very slightly upswept, never hooked. The handle will be simple and short, sized to work in 2 fingers. 4. The folding pocket rule, 2 foot, brass jointed, not a measuring tape. A rigid folding rule in 4 6-inch sections, brass jointed, that laid flat in a coat pocket. Rangers used it to measure stock for replacement pieces, to check the depth of a water source, to gauge the width of a creek crossing for a loaded pack animal. Knowing whether your mule could ford a channel that was 3 feet deep and 40 feet wide in moderate current was the difference between a wet load and a dry one, and in some seasons, between a live animal and a drowned one. Period supply house price was 25 to 50 cents. Authenticated period 2-foot folding rules with clear maker stamps have been seen between $150 and $400. To identify old brass jointed examples, the joints will show a slight looseness from decades of use, and the brass pivot pins will show wear flats where they bore against the wood leaves. The wood leaves themselves will show a slight bow from being carried folded for years in a pocket. 3. The hatchet, handle wrapped, not the hatchet in the abstract, this one, handle wrapped in split rawhide from the head down, about 6 inches, dried tight, then oiled. That wrap served 3 purposes. It kept the hand from sliding up onto the head in a wet grip. It cushioned the vibration from a hard chop in cold weather, when a bare hickory handle would sting the hands numb after 20 strokes. And it told you by feeling the dark where the head was without looking down. The rawhide wrap was field fitted, not factory fitted. A factory hatchet from a supply post in 1871 had a plain handle. The wrap was put on by the man who was going to use it. Period. Supply house price for a plain working hatchet was 40 to 80 cents. A documented period working hatchet with original rawhide handle wrap, intact and with clear provenance, is rare. Such examples have been seen between $300 and $800 in working tool collections. To identify an original wrap, old dried rawhide will be translucent, hard, and will show cracking along the grain lines. It will be shrunk tight to the wood with no gap. Modern rawhide wraps applied as reproductions are thicker, softer, and often show uniform color without the translucency of aged hide. 2. The whetstone in a leather sleeve. A small, fine grit, natural stone, usually 3 to 4 inches long, carried in a stitched leather sleeve that also held a small amount of oil in the seam. The sleeve kept the stone from chipping in transit and kept the oil available for honing. A ranger who couldn't maintain an edge on his tools was in the same position as a carpenter who can't sharpen a plane iron. Everything downstream of that skill gets worse. Period supply house price was 10 to 25 cents for stone and sleeve together. Authenticated period whetstones in original leather oil sleeves have been seen between $80 and $250. To identify original sleeves, the leather will show oil staining concentrated at the seam and at the open end from decades of use. The stone itself, if original, will be slightly concave in the center of the face from being the same width of tool drawn across it the same way for years. And then we are at number 1. The record says this is the one almost nobody talks about. Not because it is rare, because it is ordinary, and ordinary things don't get written up the way the Bowie knife does. Emmett's book has more about this piece than any other single item on this list, and when I finally read those pages, I understood why. Number 1, the combination leather punch and sewing palm. Let me tell you what that means before I tell you why it matters. The sewing palm is a piece of heavy leather shaped to fit over the palm of the hand, with a metal dimpled plate set into it. That plate is what you push a sail needle through heavy leather with, using the weight of your whole hand instead of just your fingertips, which would be destroyed in about 4 stitches on saddle leather. The combination version adds a small punch spike and a slot cutter to the same palm piece, so you can punch, slot, and stitch in the same operation without changing tools. Here is why this is number 1. A ranger in eastern Texas in 1871 who lost the use of his saddle, his bridle, his saddlebag, or his boot to a torn strap or a blown seam was not just inconvenienced. He was compromised in every piece of equipment that depended on those things staying intact. The sewing palm was the tool that kept everything else field repairable. Without it, you could identify every problem and fix none of them. With it and the sail needle and the wax thread and the awl, you could rebuild a working rig from pieces while the horse stood tied to a tree. This is not the exciting tool on the list. It doesn't have a blade, it doesn't have a history of famous makers. Nobody named a version of it after a famous fight or a famous man. It is a piece of thick leather with a metal plate riveted into it, and it is number 1 because more working days were saved by it than by any other piece on this list. And it is the one sitting in the most estate drawers in this country right now with nobody who knows what it is. Period supply house price was 20 to 40 cents. Authenticated period combination sewing palms in working condition with original metal plate intact and documented provenance have been seen between $150 and $450. To identify an original, the leather will be very thick, at least a 1/4 inch, and will be stiff from decades of dried sweat and oil. The dimpled plate was hand set in the period, and the rivets holding it will show slight unevenness. The slot in the plate for the needle eye will show wear on both edges from use. Reproductions are almost always thinner leather with a machine set plate and perfectly uniform dimple depth. Here's your task this week, friend. Go to that estate drawer, that garage shelf, That inherited toolkit. Pick up every piece of leather gear you don't know the name of. Look for a piece that fits over your palm with a metal plate or plate-shaped wear mark in it. If you find one, put it in the comments and tell me what state you're in. I read every one. I have the combination palm from Emmett's kit. It sat in a tin box for 40 years after he stopped carrying it. The leather is almost black now, stiff as board. The metal plate is still centered and tight. I took it out last winter and held it in my hand for the first time. I could still see where his grip had worn the leather smooth on the two edges he held. I put it back. Some things you don't use, you just carry them a little further. Your grandfather knew how to read every piece on this list. Somebody just didn't get the chance to teach you. That's not a failure, and it's not a loss yet. It's yours to pick back up. Tell me in the comments, what is in the drawer at your house that you cannot name? Do you have a knife without a mark? A leather piece you can't figure out? A tool you inherited and never asked about? What county you're writing me from? I read all of them every week, and I answer when I can. The piece that pulls the most comments this week, that's the one I go deep on next time. Full history, full identification, full record from Emmett's book. Next week we're going into 1883, northern New Mexico territory, and the mule packing trade that moved everything the railroad hadn't reached yet. There's a piece that every packer's mule carried that has essentially vanished from working knowledge. It sold for under 50 cents in period catalogs, and the last time a documented original came up in a provenance sale, it brought over 1,000. I'll tell you what it is, who made it, and how you know a real one. One last thing, and I mean it plainly. Anything on this list that involves a firearm or related equipment, the rules on what you can own and carry vary a great deal from one state and one county to the next. This is history. Before you do anything beyond looking at something on a shelf, check the law where you live. That's just common sense, and I'd rather say it plain than not say it. Keep what they knew